All right, hot off the news press here, ladies and gentlemen. Senate Bill 919 would identify the devices and regulate their sale of catalytic converters. So last month, a Republican senator here in the state of California, Brian Jones, he has introduced a state bill that would aim to reduce the theft of catalytic converters. So here in our state of California, we are number one in the nation for catalytic converter thefts. So what this bill is proposing is he wants to get the auto manufacturers to include the VIN number on catalytic converters. Now, we've put out blogs in the past and we've talked about converter theft and ways that maybe, the consumer could prevent theft of their catalytic converters.
Right.
But I thought since this is fresh, it's news, it's relevant in our industry, we could talk about it,
You want to talk about preventing catalytic converter theft?
Yeah, maybe a little bit of everything.
I don't know. Does that bill prevent catalytic converter theft? I mean, it sounds like it could be a deterrent, perhaps.
Yeah.
But, what's really going to prevent catalytic converter theft? Park your car in a garage? That'll prevent it.
Right.
Weld a steel plate to cover your converter under your car?
Right. And
That'd probably stop it right there.
Right.
And then you could park it just about anywhere you want and not worry about it. I just think that putting a VIN number on a converter, really, what's that going to do? It's going to go into a database, perhaps searchable through law enforcement nationwide, I suppose, provided somebody didn't grind the serial number off or the VIN number off,
Right. Because obviously that's happening now. There's so much theft out there in the industry. There's also counterfeiting in the industry, which is, on the rise. People are counterfeiting particular make converters, and they're passing them off as genuine OEM converters. And once it gets downstream, the guys that are actually decanning and are in a catalyst program that are getting paid via the assay, they're starting to see results in their assays that the PGM, the platinum group metals, the estimated ounces are coming back far less because of counterfeit theft in the industry. So
counterfeit converters that are making it into the and that's a theft issue. I see your point, because if it's on a price guide, a part number, searchable, it has X amount of value based on analysis. But it's a counterfeit.
Right.
And someone pays you far more than what it's worth, then that's theft.
Absolutely.
Because that's fraud, actually.
Right.
I guess my thought would be, let me ask you, just off the top of your head, this is kind of a question that might speak to deterrence. What do you think the average value of a converter is, say, in a Gaylord box with 150 converters in there? What do you think the average across the board is?
It could be $300.
$300 converter. Okay, so, all right, $300 converter. That's probably reasonable. Could be low, okay? Could be high if there's a lot of aftermarkets in there, right?
Absolutely.
But here's the reality in states like California, where we live. Is a $300 theft going to be prosecuted by law enforcement?
No.
Well, if they're not going to prosecute the theft of a catalytic converter, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a failure in our judicial system, our laws. Really, isn't it a $900 or a $950 threshold before the prosecution will occur?
I believe that's correct.
So really, that law promotes catalytic converter theft, doesn't it? Rather than the opposite. That's
a good point.
That's a big problem.
Absolutely.
That's a big problem. So this bill, is this going to stop them from stealing a converter with a VIN number on it?
Unfortunately, no.
No, probably not. And they're probably going to go sell it and take their chances that somebody misread the VIN number, or it's been obscured, it's hard to read. What about the catalytic converters that everyone sees in this industry that the part number has been rusted to the point where you can't identify the part number. You can tell, oh, well, it came off a Honda. I know it's a Honda or a Ford or a Chevy converter. We just can't make out the part number because it's been thoroughly rusted, which is very common.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably
East Coast.
It's probably 30-40% of most of the loads that we see. What do you think is going to happen to that VIN number that they engrave on that converter? Same thing.
Same thing.
So how is this really going to deter the theft?
Yeah.
And perhaps these VIN number converters make their way to a jurisdiction that's not entering the VIN number into the database because it's not required by law in that local jurisdiction. It might be in San Diego, right?
Yeah.
But is that also required in Pocatello? Probably not. So how does this really help?
Yeah. Unless, like you said, unless they come down harder on theft, you know, and it's implemented nationwide to deter catalytic converter thefts out there.
I mean, you know, once the horse gets out of the corral, you got to go chase it, right?
Absolutely.
It's kind of the same issue here. Right. Once that converter has been cut off that car, it's been stolen, you got to try to chase it. It's a little late. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Isn't that the old adage?
That's right.
So maybe we should be welding plates on vehicles like my Jeep. It's raised, it's up off the ground. Easy to get to that converter, cut that off.
Yeah.
Maybe we should, have the guys in the shop weld a plate on there so that
a nice big skid plate.
Right, a skid plate.
Protect the undercoating when you're out on the trails.
Yeah, put a skid plate under there, and then that would prevent the theft because it's not easy access. Just a cutting tool, a simple cutting tool isn't going to quickly remove the converter because now you're really going to have to get in the weeds on removing a plate first before you can have access to the converter, things like that.
Right.
So I think proactively preventing theft would go much further than a bill like this. And also, that's just my opinion. But then also, what about, not prosecuting petty theft, which is anything under $900 is considered petty theft. Yeah. What about that? What about changing those laws?
Right.
So that.
And it's tough because it's tough on the consumer. OEM converters are not cheap. So they're out the pocket. If they don't have the proper insurance coverage, it's on them. It's out of pocket.
Thousands of dollars.
Oh, absolutely.
To replace a converter.
Yeah, and there's more than one converter on most new vehicles.
Right.
So you're talking maybe, times two, or there could be 4 converters on that particular car if they, they happen to get both sides, both banks. Right.
Well, it's interesting that, it's such a hot topic in the media. People are talking about it. People ask me, oh, what do you guys do for a living? I tell them what we do for a living. They think, oh, my gosh, you guys are working with criminals,
And that's, the furthest from the truth, obviously.
Right.
That's why we don't buy from the
I find that rather offensive when you consider how hard we work to reach the automotive recycler in the industry, the automotive repair shop in the industry, to provide them a valuable service, a fair process in dealing and pricing for their scrap items that, obviously when a converter fails, I had one of my vehicles go in for a smog check. It came out gross polluter. So I had to replace the converter at the repair shop. Come to find out, half the monolith had been missing. And the monolith was just rolling around inside, rattling. I didn't know what that rattling noise was under the Suburban. I had no idea, right? Until I had the smog check done, and then they told me, you're a gross polluter. But the point is that, there's a lot of legitimate converters that enter the recycling stream here in the United States. And I'm going to say, we're probably looking at, in the high 90 percentile that are all legitimately being recycled. And we're looking at a very, very low percentage of converters that are stolen against the number of converters that are recycled legitimately through the industry, through automotive recyclers and repair shops. and the like. And but it makes good news copy and it sounds good. And yes, there are rings out there that are actively working to get these stolen converters. But some of that's tied to actual organized crime, in my opinion. I've heard of instances where a ring's been busted and somebody's got all these stolen converters in their warehouse. Come to find out they're actually supplying drugs to a network of addicts in the city, and this is a way for them to pay for their drugs, is to go steal converters and cash them in for drugs. And so it's that's organized crime and drug trafficking.
Right.
So I mean it really reaches really down into the depths of our society, and those are some serious issues that we need to be looking at. But we also need to be prosecuting people for that kind of a petty theft, anything under $900. You said $300 for an average converter in a Gaylord box.
Right.
That's petty theft.
Right. Unfortunately.
And you know what? Who was it that wrote this bill?
Looks like State Senator Brian Jones of Santee.
I think maybe we need to call Brian Jones and have a conversation with him about what's actually occurring in this industry.
Yeah. Give him some
to see it
from our side.
To see it from an industry perspective.
Right.
Really. I think that's what's missing and that's what's lacking.
Yeah, I agree.
If you were, if you stole a watch and it had a serial number on there and you sold it to somebody that's licensed and in the industry as a secondhand dealer, they're required to write down the description of the article, the serial number, send it into the local police department, and hold that merchandise for 30 days, give the law enforcement opportunity to enter it into the database to see if it comes up as that Rolex was stolen. It matches description, and the serial number matches what was in the theft report, and then you can match up the article to the actual police report and return it to the rightful owner.
Yeah.
But if you deal with someone who's unscrupulous, such as yourself, and he, it's a gold watch and pops the movement out, melts it down into metal, he's essentially destroyed the article, can't identify it, right? Same thing can happen to the converter. You can cut that converter open and knock the monolith out and scrap that steel can, and your tracks have been covered because you're no longer able to identify what the item is. So then my question becomes, who is buying these onesie twosie converters from the public? Okay, is it a repair shop? I don't think so. Is it an automotive recycler? I'm sure there's automotive recyclers that buy converters from the public. Is it a scrap metal recycling operation? I'd say that's probably the majority in this country. Are they licensed in the same way as secondhand dealers or pawn businesses that have to notify law enforcement of serial numbers? Do they have a 30-day waiting period to hold merchandise, to give law enforcement the opportunity? After 30 days, if they're not notified, then the merchandise transfers title to the buyer. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, it's ambiguous until it clears. Is that occurring in the marketplace today? No, it's not. Well, I'd like to ask, why not?
That's a good point.
Why not? Why aren't recyclers who are buying from the public held to the same standard as the gold buyer up the street buying jewelry, watches, coins? I only speak to that because I used to be in that industry, okay? I did that for about 30 years as well.
Yeah.
So I had a business doing that. So I know a lot about that, right? And what laws govern and what you can legally and not legally do. So, is the metal recycler required to fill out a We call them pawn slips. They're not really pawn slips, but they're notices. Mm-hmm. You keep a copy, you mail a copy to the police, you hold the merchandise. I don't think they're required to do that. Why aren't they? Okay, let's say this bill passes. Now what?
Right.
What happens next? Now we hope would see compliance, right?
Absolutely.
Well, that requires a secondhand dealer's license. That means that the owner of the business has to go through background checks, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're issued that license to deal with the public, and then the reporting procedures come into play. That's where it goes. If you're going to put a VIN number on there, how else can you enforce it?
Right. They'll have to come with title or something to verify. I think some states have been proposing that, to where you have to have proof, either the registration, something, VIN, that you own that vehicle. And I know that some states are starting to do that. But you're right. If you put a bill into law like this, there has to be follow-up.
There needs to be teeth
Absolutely.
in the enforcement.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it's meaningless. So
Right.
I would expect that to follow.
Yeah.
Is the scrap metal industry prepared for that? Is that the business they want to be in?
Right.
I mean, I guess I would ask, if you were an auto mechanic and at the end of the quarter you look back in the shop and you see the 36 converters that your shop has collected, that these converters were defective for some reason and they needed to be replaced in the normal course of business so that your customers could meet their smog check here in California. I know other states don't have it, but other states do.
Right.
And so you got these 36 converters in the back of your shop, Mr. Rich at ABC Automotive Repair. Do you own those?
I do now, if I replace them, right?
Do you own them? Can you prove?
Right.
When you go to the scrap metal recycler and the law says...
Right. You can't if you don't have the documentation, no. How do you prove it?
So how do you prove that?
Right.
You see? Well, I guess if it's silent and it doesn't speak to the issue, then it works. In other words, if no one reported those 36 converters with those VIN numbers stolen, and you sold them and they went through the reporting period and they cleared the whole holding period, then I guess it works, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
That's interesting.
That's a good point.
That's interesting. But I also know that there are a lot of repair shops out there that they allow their mechanics to keep their core or their scrap as kind of a bonus, so to speak, because they hire the mechanic and mechanic repairs and replaces parts and then saves up the scrap and then they go sell the scrap. Well, that mechanic's no longer going to be able to do that because he's an employee, he's not an owner of the business, he can't prove that he owns the vehicle that came up. So it gets harder and harder as you get into the issue. I just think prevention is much better than, this is probably a good way to go.
A good start.
It's a good start, but there's a lot of layers to this that will come down the road.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces, and like you said, it's a good start. It's got to have teeth. They got to crack down on paying cash.
They got to crack down on not prosecuting theft.
Well, that's number one.
Because not prosecuting theft is kind of turning a blind eye to it and almost condoning it, saying, well, that's okay, it's under $900.
Right.
We're not going to go after you. Well, what does a criminal think about that? It emboldens them.
That means game on to them.
Game on.
In their mind, obviously.
Well, that's just, for me, that's just how I see it, I think
it's just our
there's-
opinions, right?
it's just our opinions, but there's other ways to look at it, and there's a lot of people that have different opinions about it. But I think the reality is that everyone in our industry has already implemented procedures
Oh,
to
absolutely.
not deal with the illegitimate side of the trade,
Yeah, I agree with that.
right? Good example for us would be we don't pay cash for anything. We never have.
Yeah, that we never have, we never will. We don't buy from the
Right.
public or individuals.
Yeah, we have an anti-money laundering program in place, know your customer, so there's a lot of procedures and steps in the files
Mm-hmm.
that give us confidence who we're dealing with.
Right.
One of the things that we do here is we don't deal with the public.
Yeah.
For us, it's B2B.
Yep.
So that really probably eliminates the majority of our exposure to this issue.
Right.
I wish more companies would do that, but I think more and more are
Yeah. I
making
agree
those
with
changes.
that. I agree with that. A lot of companies out there are changing their procedures and following suit, doing the AML and knowing your customer.
Right.
I mean, you have to comply and be able to thrive in this industry. And also, like you said, it protects the company, right? You don't want to open yourself up to that kind of liability.
Right.
You know, who wants that liability? No,
Right.
we don't condone theft.
Right.
We don't want to be part of that. So,
So I look at a bill like this. How does that affect us? I don't see how it affects us because we don't buy from the public.
no. It's just news. It's just an update, you know. And,
Yeah.
And, you know, like you said, it's a good start.
It's a good start, but it would be better if we didn't decriminalize theft under $900. I think that has really been the jump start to this whole problem.
Yep.
Besides the organized crime,
Yeah, that's
with the drugs,
different aspect.
that's
of
a
it.
whole
That's-
different
yeah,
aspect.
that's
It's a different layer,
crazy.
and you start peeling the layers of the onion back, and
Right.
you start to expose all of the different things that are occurring out there. And it's a problem that's happening all over the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, all over the world. High value items.
More-
It's really unfortunate because you see people actually losing their lives over this.
Yeah, it's sad for a
I
converter.
think I read a report recently that what was it, an off-duty law enforcement officer was shot and killed confronting someone who was stealing his catalytic converter off of his vehicle.
Wow,
In Texas, I think it was. I mean,
it's terrible.
it's terrible. And to me, I kind of think the guy who shot and killed him probably was on drugs. Otherwise, if you're not in your right mind,
Right. That's probably
how does that happen?
Right. That's disgusting.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of like how you said maybe we should reach out to this guy, this senator.
I think it's a good idea.
He's
I think
not
it's a
too
good
far
idea.
from us. He's about an hour away.
Yeah, I think we
in
should.
California.
Absolutely.
Maybe we could reach out to him
Right.
and have a discussion with
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, that would be good. And if that occurs, then maybe we should also have this conversation again on camera,
Yeah.
just to
Bring him in.
disseminate
Maybe
the information.
he'll come in and sit down and
Yeah,
pick his brain, do a podcast, and
yeah. Or if not, just you and I could do a recap.
yeah, absolutely.